Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another beautiful episode of the I Hate the Antichrist podcast. We are joined today with Daniel, the person who runs Darwin to Jesus, the Twitter and YouTube channel. More people know about the Twitter than the YouTube channel. He's a former atheist turned Christian. Daniel, how's it going?
It's going great. I'm very happy to be here. I really appreciate it. So, yeah, it's going well.
I appreciate you coming on. I like to have my guests introduce themselves more because I I don't have the knowledge of you like you do. So go ahead and why don't you tell everyone what you're here for?
Sure. Well, like you said, I'm a former atheist. I was a passionate atheist until about the age of 28. And at about that age, I got saved by the grace of Jesus Christ. And since then, I've just wanted to help others to know the love that I know and the joy and the peace that comes with being a Christian and having a relationship with Jesus Christ. One of the primary things that I'm passionate about is ministering to atheists. And I know that a lot of atheists don't see it that way. They feel like I'm attacking them. And in some ways, I am attacking them. I'm attacking their worldview. I'm attacking the way that they see things and their beliefs. But ultimately, I'm doing that because I want to tear down their house and get them into a house that actually makes sense and where they can have the same things that I have, because I don't want them to go to hell. And,
Yeah.
so that's my main passion online when it comes to what I'm doing on Twitter and on YouTube is I want other atheists to see what I've seen. And so that's what I'm about.
Well, it sounds like you're already working on making them mad. I can already hear them in the comments typing it's not a worldview.
Yeah, it is, though.
So, everyone, thank you for tuning into the I Hate the Antichrist podcast. IHTA cast is brought to you by W Energy. It's a great product. It tastes great. They use coffee fruit extract, and they have a lot of really good vitamins: taurine, tyrosine, glutamine, citrulline. It has B vitamins, B12 in it, so that it gives you plenty of energy and helps you get that rest at the end of the day without having that crash when the caffeine wears off. So, if you want 10% off, you can use the coupon code IHTA at w.gg. And you can also, if you'd like to support the podcast, you can also check out webarchist.com. That is run by a friend of the podcast named BJ. She hosts the website, and she's awesome. She's very responsive to when there's any issue that I have with the website. She helped design the whole thing. So if you need a website, especially in the liberty space or the Christianity space, check out webarchist.com. So, Daniel,
Yeah.
what gives? Why do you hate atheists, you bigoted Christian?
I love atheists. I mean, that's who I'm always talking to. If I hated them, I'd want nothing to do with them. I seek them out.
You do. I've seen you on the Twitter Spaces. You know who you remind me of more than anyone
Tell me.
on Twitter. You remind me like more. I should say it this way. You're like the atheist version. You're like the version of who Sam Shamoon is for Islam. You're that for atheists. That's what you remind me of.
Well, it's too bad I don't know who that is. I'll have to look him up.
You'd love this guy. He's a former Muslim. He runs the channel Shamoonian. Same as his last name, Shmoun, and then the channel just add an IAN at the end. Basically, the dude has live streams where he invites Muslims to come on, and he just sits there until he answers questions about Christianity for them. And the dude has the entire Bible memorized front to back in the original language and the modern languages, to the point where, like, if he hears you reciting it in if he hears you reciting a verse, he'll know which version that you're like, which translation you're using. And he has that for the Quran and the Bible. And his recall is just instant. He's amazing at that part. I haven't heard you do that. but just the way that he lays out arguments, the way that he just already knows what all their arguments are going to be. He already has a rebuke in store for whatever words could possibly come out of their mouth. That you remind me of that, just for
Well,
atheists.
well, that's high praise. I do try to have an answer for most of the things that they say. Some of them do better than others at making arguments, and that's ultimately what I ultimately want is for them to obviously have a relationship with Christ. The main thing that I try to get atheists to do online is to just at least engage in a meaningful, productive conversation, because a lot of the time it's just rhetoric or insults or sophistry. And a lot of them don't even know how to make an argument. They
Yeah.
don't, it's like they've just heard things and they're just repeating basically what they've heard already, but they haven't really thought about it. And when you challenge them and you start making arguments, a lot of them will just start saying word salad and things like that, or God of the gaps. They think that anytime you make an argument for God, it must be God of the gaps,
Yeah.
and it's just like,
Excuse me, what's your evidence for that?
right, give me your
Sir,
evidence.
that's not real evidence. I wanted real evidence.
Yeah. Were you following me when I did the whole prove you're an atheist thing?
Yeah, that was funny. That
Yeah,
was so funny.
that was probably one of the most epic things I've done online.
So let's hear your journey. You said you started off as a pretty militant atheist. It sounds like,
Yeah.
and you had a definite conversion experience. So, if you'd like, please go ahead and tell us about that.
Sure. I mean, it's a pretty long story, so I'll try to not go too long with it. But,
Podcasts are great for long stuff, man.
well, normally when I tell it, it takes about an hour and a half. So I might take a few things out here and there. Of course, if I were to tell the entire story, it would take like 28 years, right? But anyway, so I was raised by my parents who were both Christians, and I was raised charismatic. And for those of you that don't know, the charismatic
Oof.
Christians, yeah, are the ones who hold up their hands when they sing. And it's kind of cringe, honestly. I still think that it's really cringe. And they speak in tongues all the time. And
Ugh.
it was just really weird to be at church. It always gave me a really weird feeling to be around that. And that's what I remember growing up, is I just would dread going to church. And I remember thinking sometimes there would be a person who would just start speaking in tongues and, just babbling, blah, 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 blah. I can't even duplicate it, of course. Maybe I'm just not sanctimonious enough. But anyway, someone would start
Well, they would
speaking in
say you're not
tongues.
saved.
Right, I know. Who knows? I hope they're wrong. But
They're
yeah,
definitely wrong.
yeah, of course. But anyway, someone would start speaking in tongues, and then somebody else would get up and start translating what they were saying into English. And I just thought, well, if God is going to give a message, why is he giving it to one person in tongues and then the other person in English who is able to understand the tongues and tell us what that person is saying? Why not just give us the message in English and cut out the middleman,
Yeah.
And I would just have thoughts like that growing up in church about a lot of things. And I would ask my mom, why this and why that, like I had a lot of questions for her about Christianity. And a lot of the time it seemed like she would say, well, you just need to have faith. And that didn't really make sense to me, because I'm like, yeah, but there's other religions other than Christianity, so what are these children being told when they have questions? What is the child in India or the Buddhist, the Hindu, what are they told when they have questions for their parents? You just have to have faith. And I knew that these religions are not in agreement with each other. They can't all be true. They contradict each other.
Yeah.
So it's like, if they can't all be true and I don't have good reasons for my religion and there's other religions, well, that's kind of a big deal, you know? Um,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
I probably wouldn't have put it that way at the time. I was still pretty young, but I knew that something was off about it. And if there's any parents listening to this, I would just say this is a very good reason to study apologetics if you have the time. And it does take a lot of time, but you want to be able to give your children a good answer when they have these types of questions. And of course, as Christians, we can't have an answer for everything. I can't answer every question, not even close. But we should be making an attempt to have as many answers as possible. And we should be making an attempt to answer the questions that our children ask us if it's possible. And if you don't know the answer, hopefully you know someone that you can ask who could supply the answer. But I do believe that Christianity does have answers, a lot of wonderful, great answers, and you can find them if you look. And it's
If I
important.
may jump in here
Yeah.
for a second, a lot of parents think that their kids are a lot dumber than they actually are, and kids understand philosophical concepts better than they understand literal concepts a lot of the time. So if you teach them from the philosophy forward, a lot of the time they'll take to the idea and understand it.
There's probably a lot of truth to that. I haven't really given that much thought. I don't know. I definitely plan on teaching my children philosophy, and I'm really big into presuppositional apologetics, and we might disagree about that, but I think that everybody.
Nerd.
I mean, it's just one of the things I realized as I got saved is like, oh, everybody has a worldview, and this is why people disagree about evidence is because they're looking at evidence from a different lens. But that's a different topic. So anyway, I just didn't feel like I was getting good answers from my parents, and then my parents got divorced, and also I do want to say that my father was not a good representation of a Christian. He was very abusive. He was a huge hypocrite. And of course, I'm a hypocrite. All of us are hypocrites to a certain extent. None of us live like Christ. None of us,
No.
right? I mean, come on. Jesus Christ was amazing, incredible. He was God in the flesh. I'm not that. But my dad was one way at church and a completely different way at home. And of course, we knew that, but nobody else did. And he would intimidate us and abuse us physically and verbally. And he was just not a good father in a lot of ways. And
That's
I think
sad,
that
man.
probably, yeah, but it's just, I mean, a lot of kids have it a lot worse. He wasn't like sexually abusive or anything, thank God. At least not that
True.
I'm aware of. But But yeah, I think that had a lot to do with the way that I conceived of God. If you've seen that movie, what was it? It was a movie about an investigator, The Case for Christ. Yeah, that's the movie. Have you seen that?
I don't think I've seen it, no.
Oh, it's really good. You should if you have a chance. But in that movie, there's an investigator. He's an atheist. He works for a newspaper, and he decides to study the case for Christianity because his wife gets saved and he wants to convince her that her faith is a lie. And I think it's Lee Strobel. It's based on a true story. Yeah, this is Lee Strobel's actual story. And anyway, at one point he talks to this woman who is a Christian, and she asks him at the end of the interview, because he's challenging everything that she's saying, she asks him, was your father like, what was your relationship like with your father? And he says, it was terrible, I hate my father. And she says, that's very common with atheists. And they tend to have a very bad relationship with their father, and it affects the way that they see God. So that's what I always think of now, and I think that there's a lot of truth to that. But anyway, my father ended up being unfaithful to my mother, and they ended up getting divorced. And I was actually pretty happy about that because I was 13. No, I was 12, and I was about to get to the edge where I was about to stand up to my dad because I was so tired of his intimidation and everything. And
Hmm.
I think if I had stood up to him, he would have probably killed me or put me in the hospital.
Jeez.
Yeah, I'm not kidding about that. That's 100% a real thing. that probably would have happened. Very, very, very likely. And I was very, very fed up. So it was just a matter of time before I stood up to him. And then he would have went ballistic. And he was a lot bigger than I was. So I wouldn't have had a chance. Much bigger, much faster, much stronger, all of it. So anyway, I was happy that he was not going to be in the house anymore. And he wasn't. He was gone. He was with this other woman. And after that, it was just me, my brother, my sister, and my mom. And from there, it's hard to say, but it's the truth. I kind of became like my dad. I wasn't really physically a bully, but I became a mental bully to my brother and sister. And I don't know why I was that way, but yeah, I became kind of a mental terrorist. I like to push their buttons and that sort of thing. And eventually, I don't remember exactly when. I think I was about 15, but I remember my mom was taking us to church, and I was dreading it so much because as I got older, I just dreaded going to church even more every time. I just would really dread being there the entire time. I could not wait to leave. And so my mom was taking us all to church, and I was dreading it so much that when we got out of the car, I looked at my mom and I said, I'm not going in there. I'm going to walk back home, and I'm not going to church anymore. And I was big enough at this time. I was bigger than my mom. I was stronger than her, that she and I knew that she couldn't make me go in there. And so I just turned around and walked home. And after that, I didn't go to church anymore. And I got way more into the whole atheist movement. That's when I really started like delving into that whole thing. I started watching YouTube videos, and I really got wrapped up into the Four Horsemen. This was around
Now, what era of the internet was this?
2006, 2007, 2008.
Okay.
Yeah.
So right before the amazing atheists started getting popular and stuff like that. So you were probably
Yeah.
pretty in it.
Yeah, and I would watch him too. He wasn't really my favorite. I really liked Christopher Hitchens. And it's funny because somebody recently, an atheist who I really like a lot, his name's John, he said that I'm sort of like the Christopher Hitchens for Christians. And I'm like, well, I don't know if that's really what I'm going for, but I did really like
I
Christopher
would
Hitchens.
disagree. Your arguments actually make sense.
Yeah. He didn't really make arguments. He was great at rhetoric. And I didn't know this when I was
Yeah.
an atheist. I thought that he just wiped the floor with all the theists. He was such a great debater. And he was a good debater, but he didn't make
Yeah.
arguments. He was great at
He
winning
tried
the
to head
crowd.
off the debate before it would get started.
Yeah. He was a very talented sophist. One of the most talented we've probably ever seen. But he didn't actually make arguments. For any person that's philosophically minded, they would just be like, he's not even saying anything. He's not even making a case. And if he did make a case, it was a poor one with holes all the way throughout it. But it sounded really good. It sounded great,
Mm-hmm.
And I was very taken with him. I thought he was the best of the four. Daniel Dennett was my least favorite, which is funny because he was actually the philosophically minded one. And now I'm much more into philosophy than I was at the time. But I still think Daniel Dennett is kind of lame, honestly. Anyway, I also really liked Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins. So, anyway, like I said, this is a long story and I'm being long winded. But I really liked the Four Horsemen, got really wrapped up into all that. And I really thought that Christianity was a death cult. And I thought that, yeah, I thought that religion was just bad for people. I see accounts like Lilith, who is on Twitter. For those of you who don't know, she has like 17,000 followers, and she believes, just like I did, that religion is the bane of existence, or sorry, the bane of human existence. Meaning that
Yeah.
if we could just get rid of the illusion that is religion, then everything would be good. That religion causes all the problems, and if we could just get everyone to step out of the curtain of the veil of illusion into reality, then the world would be wonderful. And it's this illusion, this lie that is religion that is causing all the problems, which is, of course, nonsense because the reason why human beings have so many problems is because we're evil, because we're sinful.
Exactly.
You take away our religion, it's just going to be even worse. I mean, look what happened in the French Revolution when they killed all the Catholics and they killed all the priests and they tried to get
Mm-hmm.
rid of religion. It became a bloodbath. They had two reign of terrors and it was awful. And look what happened in Cambodia and in,
Oh
of
yeah.
course, the USSR and China. I mean, it's just bloodbath after bloodbath, So this idea that getting rid of religion is going to solve the world's problems is just a fundamental misunderstanding where our problems come from. And our problems come from us being evil and wicked. And when you take away the idea that there's somebody higher than us in authority who's watching us, it just exacerbates that evil and wicked tendency that we have to be horrible to each other. Now there's really no
Mm-hmm.
reason to be good. Um,
If I may riff on that for just a moment,
yeah, absolutely.
there's a that's a really common argument that we hear, that religion caused X, religion caused Y. But what these people who push these arguments don't realize is that religion might be abused to justify some evil. Most of the time, at least in Christianity's case, it's not used to actually be the thing that makes people go out and do evil. Now, maybe for something like Islam, but not for Christianity, because it's directly against the precepts and commands that are in the faith, that you don't go out and do these horrible things. You don't go out and violently subjugate those around you to get them to believe, as long as they're not harming others. Like, you
Right.
don't do that. It directly violates the biblical law that we
Yeah.
are to people are to believe when they come to Christ. They're not just supposed to come to Christ now, because if you don't, I'll shoot you.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
directly against it. So the religion being abused to justify something is not the same thing as the religion being the cause of the
Yeah.
issue. Like, I've even seen this from this same argument logic from Christians, where they'll say, like, oh, if atheism is so good, how come Dylan Klebold and whatever the other one was from Columbine, how come they justified their murders using atheist arguments? Like,
Yeah.
we try to avoid using these exact kinds of logical fallacies in our arguments, because the abuse of an ideology tells you nothing about how an ideology actually goes.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing because on the one hand, to me, if somebody picks up a gun and they use it to, shoot somebody else they use it for evil, it doesn't mean that the gun is evil. It means they are
Exactly.
evil. So when somebody uses Christianity, they use the Bible in order to justify their evil. It doesn't mean that the Bible or Christianity is evil. It means that person is evil and he's just using this thing in order to justify his evil, and he could have used something else. But
Hmm.
on the other hand, I do think that there are ideas that, there are religions or whatever, or that are evil, and that when
Hmm.
people, get taken in by them, they're much more likely to commit evil. I truly believe, and I think I'm sure you agree, that beliefs have consequences.
Yeah. The logic used in a belief can have consequences that, if you follow them in a line, lead to a specific outcome. Like how nihilism very often leads to suicide.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like if this belief of nihilism leads to this times, then maybe we should try to not be nihilist. Maybe this seems like this is the cause, right?
Hmm.
And we should be trying to stay away from this awful thing that is nihilism if we see this correlation again and again and again. And it's logical to think that way, I think. But when you have something like Christianity, which has very clear tenets that we are supposed to forgive and to turn the other cheek and to love our enemies, and that sort of thing. And yet you have Christians that are doing terrible things and trying to justify it with, some passage in the Bible that's taken out of context. I don't think it's fair at all to lay what those people do at the feet of Christianity and say it's Christianity's fault.
I forget who said this line, but somebody in history once said the best way to give a rebuttal to an existential nihilist is to murder them.
Yeah, that's that's pretty ruthless. But I say things like that sometimes. You know,
I mean, if the
it,
shoe fits.
well, I mean, I say something like that in the fact that I say I've never met a true atheist, a real atheist, because if I did, they wouldn't be breathing, they wouldn't be alive.
Yep,
You know,
exactly.
because if an atheist were to be consistent about the implications of their worldview, they couldn't make sense of anything. They wouldn't be planning, they wouldn't be breathing, they wouldn't be doing anything. They'd just lay down and die. So I can't have a
Mm-hmm.
conversation with a real atheist because they wouldn't be able to understand the words that were coming out of my mouth.
Yep, exactly.
So I
And if they
understand that.
could, they'd deny them.
Right. Yeah, they would say, well, I think I know what he means, but it's an illusion. Everything's illusory, and I don't know anything. So it's just an absurd worldview. But anyway,
Yeah, let's jump back to the story. It was 2006. You were an epic atheist
yes.
making all the Christianity hate memes you possibly could on the internet.
I wasn't
Where
a
do you go
memist
from
back
there?
then.
You were not a meme maker. Well, you
No,
do a great job now
thanks. Yeah, I've
making
only been doing
memes.
that for about a year and a half since I got on Twitter.
It's a good skill to have.
I think so. I think memes are a wonderful way to communicate if you can do it well. A lot of people
It's the
can't.
modern scribbling on a bathroom wall.
I don't say that.
It's an
Uh,
art form.
it's an art form that far transcends scribbling on a bathroom wall. I've never seen scribbling on a bathroom wall and thought, now that is good. But I
I
see
haven't
memes all
seen
the
the
time.
bathroom wall philosophers.
I guess I haven't. Maybe it's just so tacky that I've never actually sat down and read all of it, and I never will probably.
Good.
All I see are like pictures of penises and things like that. It's
Yeah, yeah.
terrible.
I saw this one the other day. I went into a Walmart and it had said on the wall, "There's a penis on the ceiling. If you look up there, it just calls you gay."
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds about right. Yeah. Yeah, no, I really think that memes are a wonderful way to communicate ideas if you do it correctly. And like I said, a lot of people don't. But I think that it's a very powerful way to get conversations going. And, you know, I think about memes all the time, like memes that I've seen that I didn't make, but I'll have an idea or I'll think about an idea and then I'll think about a meme that's associated with that idea. And
Hmm.
it'll bring a little smile to my face or whatever. And it's just a really powerful way to communicate. I truly believe that. I want Christians to be better at making memes, because I think that that's a great way to influence the culture, personally.
Yeah, I'll say this. One of the problems in Christianity, one of the big problems, is there's this big trend about just mass producing as much of slightly relevant art to Christianity as you can, and then you just call it good without actually trying to make it look good or trying to make it make sense as a meme. Or like a lot of Christian movies suck, or a lot of Christian music is just really generic and kind of sucks. There's a lot of that out there, and that's one of the most disappointing things to me. And that goes for Christian memes too. It's one of the reasons I appreciate your memes, because you tend to do video memes more than image memes, which that's another beast, man. That's a whole different beast. And yours actually address the arguments. Like one of my favorites I saw you do, it was that Matrix fight scene.
No,
I,
it
I
wasn't the Matrix. I think it was the X-Men.
Might have been the X-Men,
with
yeah.
Wolverine and the
Yeah. And it's just like special
Quicksilver.
pleading. Duh, duh, duh.
I haven't done any on the Matrix yet, but it's been on the back of it's been in the back of my mind for about 6 months. I have a couple of different scenes that I've been thinking about and playing with. You know, because you have to
Gotta do
plan
the throat
everything out.
punch one.
I actually made that one, but I didn't do the video. I just did. I cut it up and turned it into pictures because it would
Ah.
be too fast, I think. But yeah, you could do that one probably. You really have to plan it out. It takes a lot of time to think about it
Oh
and to think
yeah.
about what everything's going to be in order to do it right. That is, it takes a lot of
Hmm.
time. But I enjoy
Definitely.
it. I love making those. And the frustrating thing about making those video memes is that I can sit there and make a video meme and probably takes about 10 hours sometimes. I've gotten pretty fast
Hmm.
at it, but it takes a heck of a lot longer than it does to make a normal meme. A normal meme will
Oh
take me
yeah.
about 5 to 10 minutes. The video memes that I make will usually do way less impressions than just a normal meme. And it's kind of disheartening because I'm like, the video memes are way better than a normal meme and they take way more time, way more work, and way more skill to make, but they don't do very well when it
Hmm.
relatively or comparatively to the just normal little meme that I make. So it's kind of disheartening when I see that. It's like I can pump out a little 5 minute meme and get 20,000 impressions, or I can sit there and take 10 hours to make a video meme and get 5,000 impressions.
Exactly.
And it's like,
Exactly.
is the juice worth the squeeze? And sometimes I'm just like,
Yes.
sometimes I'm like, this is too good. I just have to make it anyway, and I just don't care. But it is a little bit disheartening.
So you weren't making memes at the time. That's the point.
Right. I was not making memes at the time, but I
Okay.
was making a lot of quote unquote arguments. I was arguing all the time with theists and Christians and my mom. And, like I said, I thought Christianity was a death cult. And so I was very, very passionate about atheism and what it offered and science, of course. Science was the be all end all, which is super cringe now, but, uh, you know how it is. So, yeah, I was all about that, and I was like that for about 5 years or so until 2012. And in 2012, I'm pretty sure that's the right year. What happened was there was this conversation with Sam Harris, and it was on the Bill Maher show. He was talking with Ben Affleck. Do you remember that?
I think I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it ended up becoming a big deal because what happened was Sam Harris was making the case that people in the West, like liberals and people like him, should be more opposed to Islam than Christianity because
Yeah.
Islam creates way more terrorists. Islam is far more fundamentalist, far more conservative, far more opposed to liberalism than Christianity is. It's way more of a threat to Western values. So liberals should be more opposed to Islam than they are Christianity. And I thought that made total sense at the time. I was like, yeah, Sam Harris is
Hmm.
exactly right. And Ben Affleck called Sam Harris a racist for that. And
Muslim is a race or something.
right. And I was like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And I knew that Ben Affleck was also a liberal and that he was also an atheist. And, that was what was so confusing at the time, is because I thought of atheists as being the enlightened ones. We were the ones that had figured it out. We were the ones that saw through the veil, so we were like just these big giant brains, who had seen through the illusion that nobody else could see through. So to see a
Hmm.
fellow atheist make such a stupid argument, and it wasn't even an argument, but to be so silly on national television really shook me. But what shook me even more was the fact that half the atheist community agreed with him and said that he was right
Hmm.
and applauded him. And I'm like, what? I expected all the atheists to come out and say, yeah, no, Sam Harris was totally correct. Islam is way worse than Christianity. We should be more against Islam than we are against Christianity. Sam Harris said nothing wrong. And by the way, Islam is not a race. Anybody can be a Muslim. So,
These people haven't seen a Chechen in their entire lives.
right, so, but that's not what happened. What happened was like half the atheist community sided with Ben Affleck and half sided with Sam Harris, and I was on the Sam Harris side. And so to me, there was the atheist that made sense, and then there was the atheist that had went off the deep end. And I didn't understand why they had went off the deep end. But as I started to kind of study this or try to figure out what was going on, there were other things that were coming out, like atheism plus, which was atheism plus feminism. And I'm like, what in the world is this? Why would feminism be wrapped up with atheism? Now I understand, and it makes perfect sense. But I didn't understand then because I was very naive and I had no clue about worldviews and how atheism is really humanism, and it's really kind of got its roots in Satanism, this idea that you shall be as God, and it's just rebellion against God. I didn't understand that stuff. So I didn't understand why there was atheism plus, and I was totally against that. I was against the feminist narratives. So there was basically a huge split where there were atheists that were the progressives, and it was the progressive atheists versus the traditional, quote unquote, atheists who were the traditional liberals. So there's like the good liberals, and then there's the progressive liberals who have lost their mind, and it's like, what are these guys even doing? What are they talking about? This stuff is nonsense. And so I was the traditional liberal. I was on that side of things. And I was really trying to understand the whole progressive atheists and where they were coming from. It was really, really confusing to me. And that's why I kind of bring up the Sam Harris thing, because that was when I really started to kind of get my ideas about atheism and what it meant to be an atheist. That's where it started to come down a little bit. That's where I started to actually ask some questions and be a little bit uncomfortable with atheism, just a little bit. Of course, I still thought I was correct. But I guess, if I remember correctly, the next crucial part of the story for me was like 3 or 4 years later. I was really big into CrossFit at the time. And there was this guy.
That's the worst thing you've believed in so far.
I had a feeling you're going to be a CrossFit hater. To each their own. I don't do it anymore because I don't have the time, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you straightened up.
I got married and had kids.
There you go.
Also, the music and the things that women wear, men shouldn't be around that stuff, especially not married men. But Christian men shouldn't be around that stuff, frankly. Like women are wearing very, very tight stuff and bending over and all that. It's just like, yeah, I don't need to be around this, But anyway, at the time, I was all about CrossFit. And there was this guy, his name was Rich Froning. He was the best CrossFitter in the world. He had won the world championship, or whatever you call it, of CrossFit 4 times in a row. And I really looked up to him. I thought that he was just such a great athlete. He was such a great competitor. I'm very competitive, and I really respect that. And he was a gentleman, too. He would help people across the finish line after he won. And, if he ever did lose, he would be very gracious about it. And I just had a lot of respect for him. I thought he had a lot of character, and I still think that. And so one day I was watching a documentary about him on Netflix, and I'm watching this documentary, and it's showing him spending time with his family. And I was just thinking, wow, what a great guy. What an awesome guy. What a wonderful guy. Everything was showing, like how much his children adored him. He was like the Steve Irwin of CrossFit, in that documentary. Awesome. Awesome guy. Well, then he sits down with his family to pray. And as soon as he did that, I completely dismissed him. And I was like, oh, he's just a stupid Christian.
Eyes glaze over, and it's like, this guy.
Yeah, everything about him just changed for me in that moment. But then I had an epiphany. I thought to myself, wait a second. If I were to be like in some kind of terrible situation, like let's say I was deployed or something, and who would I want there with me? You know, if I were in a situation where I really needed someone with character to be with
Mm-hmm.
me and to have my back and to not leave, who would I want there? Would I want Rich Froning, who's a Christian, or would I want an atheist, like all these atheist friends that I have online? Who would I want there with me? And the question was so easy. It was like Rich Froning, 100%, every time.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I would pick Rich Froning. I would pick one Rich Froning over 10,000 of the atheists that I knew online. No question. No question about that. You know, and that's what I realized. I was like, because all these atheists that I knew online, all they ever wanted to talk about was porn, women, and drugs. That was pretty much it. And then they would also kind of bicker about stupid stuff, like little dramas here and there. They were very, very, very narcissistic, very all about
Oh yeah.
themselves. And I was too, you know, don't get me wrong, I was no saint. But I still had enough common sense to know that if I deployed, I would want Rich Froning with me and not these guys. Not these guys over here. Not my fellow atheists. You know, I didn't want to have to rely on those guys. Um, So when I realized that, it made me start to see Christianity in a different light. Because it's like, well, a lot of Christians are actually like Rich Froning, now that I think about it. You know, a lot of Christians I actually would want to be there with me if I were deployed. They're people that have shown that they cared about me. And they seem to be people of integrity, and they're very different than the atheists that I know. They're much more reliable, you know. And once I started to put that together, it just made me kind of see Christianity as the good guys, actually, and atheism as maybe the bad guys in a lot of ways, at least culturally. You know, it's like, who do I want to live in a society with? Do I want to live in a society with Christians who have integrity and values that are good? Or do I want to live in a society with these atheists? Like, would I want everyone to be like them? And it's like, no, don't want to live in that society at all. No, thank you.
So you had the same sort of moment that Richard Dawkins had recently, where he
Yeah.
said that he's a cultural Christian.
Yeah, and Ion Her CLD also, I think, is went through pretty much the exact same thing. I don't think that she's saved yet, but I think that she's a lot closer than she was. I mean, of course, I want her to be saved, and I hope that she's saved soon. I hope she's already saved. Maybe I'm wrong. But she's definitely realized the same sort of things that I was realizing at the time, which is that atheism is incredibly shallow when it comes to character and building a society. It really has nothing to offer. It's like a flame. It just burns things to the ground. Fires don't build things. They just destroy, and that's all atheism does. Is it destroys people's faith. It has nothing of substance to offer in and of itself. It's just a matter of what is going to rise from the ashes. That's the only question. So
you had this moment.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and after that, I talked to my cousin Matt, who's a little bit older than me, and he was a conservative. And we talked, and I told him about this sort of stuff, and I was griping to him about the progressive atheists, and I was like, I don't understand why they don't get it, why they think that feminism is legitimate, and why they are always talking about all this nonsense. And he said, you need to read a book. And I said, okay, what's the book? And he said, it's this
A
book.
Bible.
No, no, it was The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. Have you heard of that?
I have not.
Okay, well, it's a pretty interesting book. Talks about, this is written by a liberal. Jonathan Haidt is liberal, but he basically studied the morality of conservatives versus liberals. And what he found is pretty interesting. He found that there are actually 5 moral pillars, and that atheists and liberals are typically operating on only 2 of them, whereas
Oh, I do
conservatives,
remember reading that. Yeah.
conservatives are operating on 5 of these pillars. So the pillars, I never can remember all of them, but it's like do not harm, and then there's another pillar is
let's see, fairness and equality, and then another one is tradition, or an idea of the sacred, basically. So liberals typically are only operating on two of these, though, and that's why you can go up to a liberal and you can say something like, if a brother and sister, you can ask them this question: if a brother and sister can't get pregnant, so they can't make a baby because they're infertile, is it okay if they have sex? And the liberals will say, well, yeah, it's not bad, it's not wrong if they have sex, because there's not going to be any harm that's caused by it. That's what they're
Ugh.
Yeah, but that's what they'll say. And that's because they only have these two pillars. It's like, well, is it fair and equal? Yes. Is there any harm that's going to come from it? No, because they're not going to have a baby, so then it's fine. Whereas the conservative is not only going to be operating on those two pillars, he's got three other pillars. And one of those has to do with not breaking taboos. And to have sex with your sister is a huge taboo, and it violates tradition. It violates our disgust factor and these types of things. So the conservatives is going to say, absolutely not. It's not right at all. And that's why that happens. That's why conservatives and liberals see things so differently, because they have very different moral systems. And when I realized this, it's like, oh, well, liberals have a way more shallow, more moral system than conservatives do. And I was like, well, kind of makes it seem like I shouldn't be a liberal, you know? It seems like I should be a conservative. So that really kind of pushed me more into wanting to be a conservative, once I understood that. But I still thought that it wasn't true that God existed. At this time, I thought that Christians were the good guys. I became much more conservative. I was like a libertarian at the time. And now I'm not very political at all. I try not to focus on that sort of thing. But at the time, I was much more engaged in politics. I really liked Stefan Molyneux and libertarianism and that sort of thing. Let me think. What was the next thing that happened in the story? So, yeah, I was really big into libertarianism. Yeah. The next thing that happened was I was in a Discord call. And this is something that atheists always think that I'm lying about. But I was in this Discord call. I was walking my dog at the dog park. And you know what Discord is, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's for those of you that don't know, it's just a chat room typically, where you can go into a room where a bunch of other people are and you can talk. Everybody can kind of talk at once, or it's not great when that happens. But anyway, I went into a room with like 20 atheists, and I was just walking my dog, and I went into the room because I was bored. I was just expecting to listen, and they started talking to me as soon as I went into the room. I was a new guy there, so they wanted to figure out who I was and what I was about. So they started asking me questions, and I started answering. Eventually, it came out that they said something about morality, and I said, well, yeah, that's wrong. And they were like, well, what do you mean it's wrong? And I said, well, I mean, it's immoral. And they said, well, aren't you an atheist? And I said, yes. And they said, but you think that this thing is actually wrong? And I said, yes. It's something like rape. And they said,
Mm-hmm.
well, you can't make sense of that on atheism, right? Like, we can't account for objective moral facts. And I said, what? And they're like, yeah, we can't account for objective moral facts on atheism. That's not a thing. And I was like, of course it is. You're being ridiculous. And they're like, no, it's not. It's literally not a thing. We can't do it. And I'm like, we can definitely do it. I'm going to do it. And so then they sat there and explained to me things like Hume's guillotine, which says that you cannot derive an ought from an is. And, for those of you that don't understand that, it's like, just because the grass in my yard is 3 inches long, it doesn't then follow that I ought to mow it, right? Just because my house is blue, it doesn't follow from the fact that my house is blue that it's good that my house is blue.
Yeah.
And a lot of atheists make this mistake where they start with an is, like, it is the case that humans don't like pain, And then they say, therefore, pain is bad. And that doesn't follow. You're deriving values and obligations from something that just is the case.
Mm-hmm.
So they explained that, and they explained some other things to me. And I set out to prove them wrong. I was going to figure out how to ground objective morality without God. And I was dead serious about this. I was dead set on it. And I tried for about 3 years to ground objective morality without using God. And after about 3 years, I really understood the enormity of the problem, and I gave up. To me, the idea, even as an atheist, the idea of saying that morality is just opinion was nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
Absolute nonsense. To say, well, gee, I don't like rape. It's not something that I personally prefer to do. But if you want to rape, I mean, I can't stop you. And, to each their own. The idea of thinking that way about morality is just such nonsense. And that's really
Mm-hmm.
what subjective morality boils down to. Because it's just all preferences. If there's no truth about the matter, it just boils down in preferences. Hey, I don't like my coffee with sugar in it. I like my coffee black. But if you want to drink your coffee with sugar in it, there's nothing wrong with that. You like your coffee one way, I like my coffee another. You like to rape, I don't. You're not doing anything wrong. There is no such thing as right or wrong. You like one thing, I like another. We have a difference, but
Yeah, I believe it was Penn Jillette who said, I rob and rape exactly as much as I want, which is zero.
yeah. Yeah, and the problem with that is like, okay, but if you wanted to rob and rape, then would it be bad? You know?
Exactly.
And that's what we're trying to get at. It's like, I'm not interested in how much you want to rob and rape. I'm interested in telling the people who do want to rob and rape that they're doing something actually wrong, and that they should go to
Mm-hmm.
jail, and that there should be a price that is paid, and that justice is a real thing. That's what I'm interested in. I don't care at all about how much Penn Jillette wants to rob and rape in this particular moment. Because the fact of the matter is, if morality is subjective, then if he decides in the next moment that he wants to rob and rape, there's nothing wrong with that. And it's just a matter of circumstance that he happens to have a preference where he doesn't want to rob and rape. If he wanted to rob and rape, there'd be nothing wrong with it. It's just a matter of happenstance that he doesn't want to, and he could be a person that does. That whole argument is just absolutely terrible. But anyway, morality is something I care a lot about. I
Mm-hmm.
always
Me
have.
too, man.
Yeah. So when I start talking about it, I get a little bit amped up. But
So
anyway,
these guys in the Discord call got you going on for literally over a year trying to
no, 3 years.
disprove.
Three
Oh,
years.
3 years
Yeah.
trying to disprove that morality can't be objective
On atheism.
while while being an atheist.
Yeah, meaning that if there's no God, there's no such thing as objective morality. That's what they said. And I tried to ground
They were
objective morality.
gatekeeping the non-liberal.
Yeah. I wish I still knew some of those guys, because I'd like to call them in, when I'm having these debates with other atheists who are saying that morality can be grounded on atheism. I'd like to bring these guys in because they actually understood some things about philosophy, which I appreciated. But anyway, so yeah, I tried for 3 years, failed completely. And so then it kind of made me, put me at a fork in the road, because I'm like, I don't want to say that morality is subjective. But if atheism is true, morality is subjective. But that's nonsense. I know that it's not. I know that there are moral facts. I know that it's wrong to rape. I know that it's wrong to murder. These are facts. These are more obvious to me than the fact that I have a nose on my face.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you tell me that it's not actually wrong to rape a child, I want to smack you in the face. Because that's absurd. It's absurd to say that. And so it put me in this weird predicament where I'm realizing, wow, my worldview, atheism, has consequences. If
Mm-hmm.
atheism is true,
that means that what seems obvious to me isn't actually obvious. It means that I have to embrace the absurdity that it's not actually wrong to rape children. And once I realized that, I was like, well, are there other consequences that come from believing that is no God? Are there other things that would be the case if God does not exist? And I started to turn my very skeptical eye, which was always outward, it was always looking at religion. I started to turn that eye onto my atheism itself. And I started to look at the things that I believed internally and critically evaluate them. And as soon as I started doing that, I started to see all these problems, like for one, my epistemology. I had been saying all my life, since I've been an atheist, I don't believe in God because I haven't seen God. I haven't felt God. I haven't smelled him. I haven't heard him. You show me God, I will believe in God. Like I don't believe in Santa Claus because I haven't seen him. If I rode in Santa Claus's sleigh tomorrow night, I would believe in Santa Claus. That's what I would say, right? So I was an empiricist. You got to give me empirical data, sense data. Let me see him, let me touch him, and I'll believe, right? Well, I realized that when I said that, I was making a logical argument. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm appealing to logic. Well, logic, it's the thing I'm appealing to. Have I ever seen it? Have I ever touched it? Have I ever tasted it? Have I ever heard the laws of logic? No. you know so I'm appealing to something as if it exists that I've never empirically validated. And not only have I never validated that logic exists, I didn't think it was possible to validate that logic existed because, of course, it's not made of material. The laws of logic are immaterial. They're not somewhere floating around in the universe or something. They're conceptual in nature. They're not material. But I'm a
Mm-hmm.
materialist, so here I am as a materialist, quote unquote, believing in immaterial things like laws of logic. Well, that's kind of a problem. Seems like kind of an inconsistency, and it seems like I'm making exceptions for my epistemology. Because if I'm saying I don't believe in God because I haven't empirically gotten any evidence for his existence, well, I don't have any empirical evidence for the existence of laws of logic, but I believe that
Mm-hmm.
those exist. So that seems like special pleading to me.
There's an infinite number of things that
Yeah,
you don't have any sort of physical evidence that they exist, but
right.
they do. For example, one of my favorites is qualia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Because, like, yeah, sure, your eyes can see some nanometer wavelength of light, and it'll see it as blue light. But does blue exist? Well, you can experience blue. It's right there in front of you, but does it exist, buddy?
right.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of things like that. I mean, numbers is another one. Where is the
Mm-hmm.
number 7?
It's in Plato's realm of forms.
Right. It's certainly not material, though,
Exactly.
and I'm calling myself a materialist. And it's like, there's all these things that are not made of material that I believe in. I believe in math. I believe in the number 7. I believe it exists. I believe in these laws of logic. I believe in my ego, myself, my
Yeah.
identity. These are not material things. Consciousness is not material, right?
No.
So once I started to realize this stuff, I'm starting to kind of freak out a bit because I still thought that atheism was true. So I went and I talked to my friend who was on Discord, and he and I had known each other for like 3 years, and we would talk all the time. He was British. He actually lived in Wales. Yeah, he was Welsh, which is
Huh.
interesting. Some people might not know that being Welsh makes you British, but if you live in Northern Ireland, no, sorry, that's not correct. If you live in Scotland, Wales, or England, you are British because you live on the island of Britain.
Yeah. If you're in Northern Ireland,
It's
you are
UK.
of the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, you know
But you're
about this. A
Irish.
lot of
Yeah.
Americans don't. I know
Yep.
this because I went to Scotland for a few months. But anyway,
Oh, nice.
yeah. But anyways, he and I
would talk all the time. He was very philosophically minded, much more so than I was, and he was older than me, and I looked up to him as an atheist and stuff. We had a pretty good relationship at the time. Anyway, I brought this stuff up to him, and I said, I told him all this stuff, all these problems I was finding with atheism, and I thought that he was going to explain it all and show me the errors that I was making. And what he said to me, I'll never forget, and nobody ever believes this, but it's the truth. He said, if you keep asking questions like this, you're not going to be an atheist much longer.
It's true, man.
That's what
It's
he
true.
said. Yeah, he knew. And I understand now what he was saying, but at the time I was so floored because I'm like, I was expecting him to answer these questions, and he didn't. He didn't answer it. He just said, if you keep asking questions like this, you're not going to be an atheist much longer. And I'm like, well, that makes me want to ask more questions because it sounds like
Yeah.
there's not any answer here, you know? And so I did. I kept asking questions. I kept digging. And eventually what I came to is that atheism is literally a contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because of the problem of knowledge. I think there's a couple others as well, but the one I came to at the time was the problem of knowledge. Because if atheism is true, knowledge is essentially impossible. It's not possible to know anything because everything is basically assumed, and there's no higher power, there's no all-knowing being that could give us any knowledge. So knowledge would be totally impossible if atheism is true. But to say that I know nothing creates a contradiction because it's like saying everything that I utter is false, right? If you say everything that I say is false, to say that statement cannot be true in and of itself
Yeah.
because it's a true statement. It's a contradiction. It's like saying there is no truth. Well, that a true statement? It's a contradiction. So to deny that you have any knowledge is literally to create a contradiction because when you talk about how much you know, every time you say I'm ignorant of something, you're also making a knowledge claim because you're saying I know that this thing here I don't know. Just like when you say something is false, you're actually making a truth claim because you're saying it is true that this thing is false.
No, I
So
just don't believe in it.
right, yeah. But whenever you appeal to the falseness of something, you're necessarily appealing to the fact that truth exists. And whenever you appeal to the ignorance of something or your ignorance of something, you are necessarily appealing to the fact that you do know things, the fact that you have knowledge, because all statements of ignorance are also statements of knowledge, just like all statements of falsehood are statements of truth at the same time. They entail each other. So if ignorance is possible, then knowledge must be possible. So yeah, to say I know nothing is a contradiction. And yet atheism must say that it knows nothing. It can't have certainty. It's not possible on the atheist
Mm-hmm.
worldview. And that's because an all-knowing being is the only way that knowledge is possible. One way I like to put this is if you think about, like, let's say we can know things, and I say, how much stuff do you know? And you say, well, I know like 1% of all possible knowledge. So here's the circle with all possible knowledge, and you know one little dot, you know 1% of that. Well, the question is, could the stuff that you don't know prove you wrong about the stuff that you think you know? And the answer should be, of course. Of course, new information could prove me wrong about what I think I know. And if that's true, that you could be proven wrong about what you think you know by stuff you don't know, then that means that you're not able to ever really know something unless you know everything. Because if you don't know everything, then the stuff you don't know could prove you wrong about the stuff that you think you know. So in order to know anything, you have to know everything or be given knowledge somehow through revelation by someone who does know everything. But this means that knowledge it means that God, an all-knowing being, is a necessary precondition for the possibility of knowledge. If there's no God who's all-knowing, then knowledge is impossible. That's what I realized anyway. So this meant that atheism was a contradiction, because it led to saying, I know that I know nothing. And it also validated theism, because theism can account for knowledge. So if atheism is a contradiction, it must be false. And if atheism is false, then that means that theism must be true. And when I realized that, I'm like, wow, that's game set match for atheism, right? Like, I care about what's true, so I can't really be an atheist anymore. And I called my mom up and I talked to her about it, and she was really excited. She's like, Daniel, you need to go pray right now. And I'm like, I will, Mom, but I'm not going to do it yet. And the truth was, I wanted to keep sinning. I was still
Mm-hmm.
super addicted to pornography, and I smoked.
What
And
was that first thing? Oh, I thought you said hua. I was like, what's hua? Is
no,
some drug I've never heard of before?
something the guys in the army say. Anyway, yeah, so I wanted to keep sinning. That's the thing about being an atheist, is you're your own little god. You decide what
Mm-hmm.
you want to do. And it's hard to get down and give your life over to God. It's
Oh
really,
yeah.
really difficult. And that's what I had to do. And I put it off. I put it off for 3 months. And finally, after 3 months of continuing to sin and everything, and I wasn't thinking about it that way, but that's what it was. I i just was like, all right, I'm going to stop putting this off. And I got down on my knees and I prayed, and I said, listen, God, I know that you exist, and if you exist, I know that you're good, because I know that there is such a thing as objective morality, and I know that if there is goodness, you must be the source of that goodness. So, if you're good, then I want to serve you. Why wouldn't I, right? And like, who else am I going to serve? And so I said, if you're good, then I want to serve you, and I want to give you my life. And it wasn't I'm just being honest here, it wasn't a Christian prayer, because I still didn't know if it was the Christian God, but I knew that whatever God it was, he was good, and that I should be serving him, and I gave him my life. And it was crazy. I got up from that prayer, and I was walking to go get food. I was outside and I was just looking up at the stars, and everything looked different. Suddenly the world was so different than I had seen it before. Suddenly the world had meaning and purpose. And I was like, wow, there's actually a reason for why I'm here. And there's actually somebody up there who cares about me, who cares about this little grain of sand floating through space. We're
Isn't
here.
it beautiful?
It's the most beautiful thing. It gives me tingles just thinking about it again, when you realize that. And it's like, wow. Because atheism is, these atheists, they're lying to everybody, and they're lying to themselves, because it's a terrible worldview, and they know it deep down. But it's so empty and it's so awful. I used to think about dying, and I would break out in a cold sweat. Um, because the idea of not existing forever is just horrifying. We all want to keep living. And these atheists, they say, well, life has more meaning if you only have one life. Who wants to live forever? And they're full of it. None of us want to die. It's like, if you think that life is more precious because you have less of it, then why take another breath? Every breath you take is making your life less valuable, you know, and yet they keep breathing, and they all want to extend their lives as much as possible. So they're just being ridiculous. Anyway, I looked up at the stars, and they were so beautiful. They looked so different than they had before. And everything looked so different. And I had this stupid smile on my face as I'm walking to go get food, and I'm passing people, and I just couldn't help but grin. I was happy. And it was about 2 weeks, maybe a month after that I heard the gospel again. And I had heard it my whole life, arguing with Christians and stuff, but I heard the
Yeah, but
gospel.
it's different that first time you hear it after a revelation. It's
Right,
so different.
yes, it was totally different. I heard it, and suddenly it everything clicked into place, and I was like, wait, that's what Christianity has been saying this whole time? That Christ went on and died on the cross for me, like for the sins that I've committed, that he went and took the penalty that I deserve. I mean, it just completely blew my mind, because I had never understood it before. It always sounded like nonsense, like, why does Christ need to, he did what on the cross? What? I didn't understand it. I didn't have ears to hear. But suddenly,
I thought your God didn't like human sacrifice, huh?
yeah, yeah. Suddenly it made sense though. And I understood it. And I was like, this is the truth. Christianity is true. And once I understood that, then I gave my life, to Christ, and I became a Christian. And it was really amazing because my wife, she wasn't my wife at the time, but we had met both as atheists. She was a Bernie bro, though. I was conservative. So she
Mm.
was she was like a liberal feminist and stuff. You know who she is on Twitter, right?
I've seen her around, yeah.
Yeah, okay. But anyway, yeah, she was very different then when I first met her. But anyway, she got saved right around the same time as me, like a little bit before, actually. Yeah, it was just really incredible that we both got saved at about the same time. And so then we didn't have to fight about what church we were going to go to or whose doctrine was correct. We kind of just figured all that stuff out together as new Christians, as baby Christians. And it was really amazing. And we got married very shortly after that because it was like, oh, well, we can't be living together anymore. But it was just amazing too, the changes that God made in my life, because even though I was a conservative, I was still incredibly selfish, and I still swore and smoked, and I was very difficult to deal with. I didn't care about people very much at all. I was very narcissistic, and God just started making these changes in me, like suddenly I would hear someone take the Lord's name in vain, and I would be like, why'd they do that? It just seemed unnecessary. And then I was like, well, why am I doing it? Why am I taking the Lord's name in vain? Why is this an expression that I just say and it just rolls off the tip of my tongue like nothing? It doesn't make sense. And I
Mm-hmm.
stopped, and I stopped all of my cursing and swearing, and it started to be where I would hear other people do it, and it would almost make me wince because it sounded so bad. And before I never cared about it. It never bothered me at all whatsoever. And suddenly when I would watch a sex scene in a movie, I would be like, what is the point of them putting this sex scene in this movie? It doesn't do anything for the plot. There's nothing that's being added. This is just wasting time, and I don't want to watch this. Whereas before I never thought like that. I was like, yeah, great, a sex scene, all right. you know Now I'm probably going to go watch porn.
Yeah, yeah,
um,
exactly.
right. But suddenly my thoughts on that just had shifted completely. God just made all these changes in my life. It wasn't overnight, but it was gradual. And it was really, really incredible. I mean, I guess I'll just say that my wife and I, we found a wonderful church. We got married, and we had two children so far, and we've got a third one on the way. And God has just really, really blessed us, and it's something that, of course, none of us deserve. None of us really deserve anything, but I'm really, really just so thankful to God for everything that He's done for us. And one of the frustrating things for me, if I'm being frank, is I look at all these other atheists that are just like I was, that are just as mean, probably not as mean as I used to be. And I'm like, if I could get saved, why aren't these guys saved? Why don't they know God? Like, why me? And it
Mm-hmm.
frustrates me because I want them to know what I know. I want them to know Christ. I want them to have the peace and to know that that somebody cares about them and that they're here for a reason. I want them to have that relationship, and it frustrates me quite a bit that they don't. But then I just remember everybody's on their own path, and it took me so many years to figure out that Christianity was true, and to surrender to God.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kind of have to remember that, and that God has a plan, and I don't understand it, and I probably never will, but I just have to trust Him. So
Well, that's an amazing, amazing testimony, man.
Well,
Uh,
God gets all the glory. That's my story.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'll give you a quick rundown of mine real quick. It's not
Yeah,
as lengthy.
yeah. I told you mine
Um,
takes a while.
so for me, I grew up Christian as well. I grew up in the Evangelical Free Church. D- Basically, they're a regular evangelical church, so Billy Graham types.
Okay.
But the main feature of the evangelical free church is the way evangelism is done is not active evangelism. It's more of a passive evangelism where it's pretty common to try to reach out to people and have them just outright reject you because they disagree and they don't see the usefulness in what you're claiming. They think it's just stupid, and so they just reject you outright. Well, evangelical free evangelism is passive. So you live the life, you let it be who you are, you interlace those values through your day to day life, and eventually people who are around you will approach you and ask about the hope you have within. And at that point, you can be sure that your evangelism can reach them. And so that passive evangelism is the whole crux of the evangelical free church. So I grew up in that.
All right.
And I was a good little Christian. Got saved at like 7 years old, got baptized. But I don't know if it took, as it were. I had I had this. I don't even know how to put it. I had this inkling in the back of my mind, like, man, do I really believe this? I'm saying I believe it. I think I believe it. I believe it historically, but do I believe it from like a personal philosophical standpoint? I was a very bright kid. I was one of those gifted kids, and that actually has some issues that it can cause when it comes to trying to believe something, where you question your own belief because you still have all these intellectual or pseudo intellectual objections that come up in your head, you know? So, uh, even as a little kid, I had those same sorts of pseudo intellectual objections. And so when I became a teen and I became more disinterested and less, less inclined to, or, more rebellious, I guess I'll just say more rebellious, I started drifting away from the faith. And I drifted quite far to the point where I would say that I was unsaved. So that does mean I'm not traditionally reformed. I do believe you can apostatize and lose your faith, personally. I don't believe in the whole, like, oh, he was never really a Christian in the first place thing. I don't think that's helpful. But anyway, that's beside the point.
Said
The
you were
direction I
drifting, right?
was, yeah, I was drifting. The direction I was going was not good. It was it was kind of depressing. But at the time, all I cared about was pleasure, 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 pleasure. So when I was a teen, I became a little bit of a man whore. I was one of those types of guys who would flirt first, ask questions later. I got into fights because I would flirt with guys' girlfriends, and then when they beat the crap out of me, I would go back and flirt with their girlfriend again afterwards.
Wow, you're Mr. Still Your Girl?
100%, dude.
That
I was literally Mr. Steal Your Girl.
is low.
Man, I was I'm among the worst of sinners, man.
Yeah, no.
Worst of sinners.
Yeah, we're all terrible. You're in good company.
So, as Mr. Lowest of the Low, I was not the most savory person to hang out with, and I lost a lot of good people in my life. I became very lonely, and when I finally became an adult, I had basically drifted completely. I would maybe not completely. I was holding on by a thread, maybe, but the morality was gone. I mean, aside from the fact that I had my personal morals, the morality, The conviction to be moral was gone. And I had a lot of very bad habits I developed. Then eventually I moved away from my family. And my family were kind of the ones who were keeping me attached to my moral behavior and keeping me anchored in God. But when I was in, man, how old was I? Maybe 25, 24. I had my mother purchase well, she got my inheritance, and she said I can either give you the money or I can get you a place to live and you can go be on your own instead of being stuck with us. And I said, yeah, let me go out on my own. And so she spent my inheritance money. With her approval ratings, she got and paid off a trailer and a car, and they set me off on the road. And I drifted completely. I stopped doing any sort of religious stuff. I stopped consuming any sort of religious anything. But I did still hold to my old spiritualism. I did not ever become a materialist at any point. I was always a dualist still, because I always still believed in the spirit, because I grew up in a more philosophical household like that, where they sort of instilled in me that there are certain things that are impossible in the materialistic worldview.
That's
And
really
I was
cool.
yeah, that at least having that kept me grounded away from materialism, but it did not help when I ended up getting into Buddhism. And I started listening to Joe Rogan, and I started messing around with psychedelics.
Did you see any like demons or anything like that?
I have had experiences, but I wouldn't call them visual. I'll get to that in a bit.
Okay.
So I got really into Joe Rogan, and from Joe Rogan, I got into meditation and a little bit into weed. And mostly it was just meditation and weed for a long time. And through meditation, I got into a speaker named Alan Watts. Have you ever heard of him?
Sounds really, really familiar.
He's a British guy, old British man. He's a lecturer from I think the 1930s to the 1970s, if I remember right. I could be wrong about the time frame there. But anyway, I listened to his lectures, and I would meditate to them. So that'll put that in your pocket. We'll talk about that in a moment. But that's when this part started. So I got very heavily into psychedelics. Now I wasn't doing them like every weekend. Very heavily on psychedelics is not like other drugs. With other drugs, it's like, oh, you want to do it every day as a release. Psychedelics aren't like that. They're a rare, extremely intense experience, and heavy usage for most people is not based on like using them a little bit every day. That's considered light usage. What's considered heavy usage is using them in mega doses once every 3 or 4 months, because you develop a very high tolerance for them very quickly. By very quickly, I mean like if you take 2 tabs of LSD and then the next day you take 2 tabs of LSD, the second set of tabs is going to be like a quarter the strength.
Wow. So in order to do it correctly, you have to wait for the effects to wear off. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. And you have to wait quite a while for it to completely. You want to be out of that. It puts you into a mindset, into a very specific mindset. They call it a headspace. It puts you into a very specific headspace, and that headspace, if you are in that headspace when you take more psychedelics, that is going to make the trip less powerful in a certain sense, because you're not going to have that sort of visceral reaction to everything that's going on. You want to have some time for life, the normal mindset to return and to live in life again for a little bit, just because of the profundity of how it feels.
Because it feels really enlightening, doesn't it? It feels like you have all these amazing ideas and all these revelations. Once you
It
come out of
can.
it, it feels like you have a really, I mean, I've never done it. I'm just telling you, like, what I
What you've
understand of
heard.
it. Yeah, is that it's kind of like having this dream where you have all these revelations, and then you wake up and you kind of just all these things that seemed so clear, they just kind of slip, and you kind of forget them, and they don't really make sense anymore.
I didn't personally have that be my experience. I've heard others say similar things.
Okay.
For me, it was more, it puts you in a specific mindset. And what that mindset does is that mindset changes your outlook on everything, more so in in the moment than anything else. But there's that sounds more like a medium strength trip on marijuana. So I've done mushrooms, I've done acid, and I've done DMT. I did not do enough DMT to see demons as far as I'm concerned, but I did see. I, I don't know how to describe this other than I would look at a shadow that was roughly crescent moon shaped, and I would see, you know that stereotypical drawing of a crescent moon that has like a face on the inside of the moon, like the moon man face, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's like a profile shot.
Hmm.
I would see that.
Okay.
I would see that, but it wasn't like a moon. It was a jester. I
Hmm.
would see that, and that's actually a theme in a lot of spiritual practices around the world. Um,
It's common, huh?
it's very common. It's
How
they
weird.
call it a trickster or a jester organism, or not organism entity. Um,
That is really bizarre.
Oh, it is absolutely bizarre. As far as I'm concerned, that spiritual realm is real and it is inhabited by evil, but it's not. It's more like our world than a lot of people give it credit for. A lot of Christians who are extremely anti psychedelic think that it's always going to be full blown demons every time, no matter what. And a lot of people who are in that world be like, no, none of it's angels and demons. They're just all neutral, just like us. And most of them are even benevolent. Like, no, it's not like that either. It's like our world where there's a lot of malice, but there's also a lot of good, and most of it is neutral.
Hmm.
It's neutral with an underlying thought of whatever emotional thing you are personally tended to. Like if you go outside in a good mood, you're gonna see somebody, some homeless guy sitting by the side of the road. You're gonna think he's just chilling. I mean, he might be homeless, but he's just chilling. But if you
Right.
go out in a bad mood, you might see that same homeless guy sitting. You're like, oh my gosh, he's destitute. This is the most depressing thing. So
Hmm.
it's all based on your outlook. They call it your set.
Okay.
Your set is your mind. It's short for mindset.
Yeah, which kind of has to do with presuppositions or the framing of
Yeah,
how you're viewing things going in. Like, are you a positive thinker? Do you feel blessed by the
exactly.
way that your life is, or are you negatively minded? Do you focus on the bad things, these sorts of things, right?
Exactly. Just like that. And
Yeah.
so from a what it ends up doing is it ends up putting you into a mode where for the next few days to weeks, you get what feels like these downloads from the universe where you'll just be sitting there, I don't know, taking calls at work. And all of a sudden you'll have this epiphany of like, oh my gosh, we really are all one.
That's so funny. Yeah, I've heard there was this one time, I can't remember who did it, but there was this woman who was basically doing automatic writing or something, and I think it was a demon that was talking through her, and he was telling her that, or she was writing that out, that all is one. And yeah, it's funny. I think there might be a theme there with all that. But anyway, go ahead.
So what I'm convinced of in as far as that's concerned is it's not all entities. For the most part, it's just all from within. The vast majority of it, you might experience some sort of entity like activity, but even that, in my opinion, that's coming from within too. So what it ends up being is it ends up being this thing where you are refilling your tank with this mindset every once in a while. And what the goal seems to be is the goal seems to be to meditate and let go. And what psychedelics do is they assist you in the letting go.
And by letting go, you're trying to melt into the one and let go of your identity, aren't you?
That is the sub goal, but it's not the end goal. The end goal is to have a trip where your soul does something else while you're blended into that oneness.
You're talking about where your soul leaves your body?
That can be part of it. Maybe not your soul, maybe your experience leaves.
Well, there's a
That
name for that,
maybe that
isn't it?
it's not like astral
Yeah,
projection.
that's the name I was thinking of. You're not talking about that, okay.
It's not, because it's not you anymore for the most part. It's your experience. It's your experiencer within. Um, you'll if you ever go on the internet and you read about it, you'll hear people using they'll replace the pronoun I with the pronoun swim in all caps, which is an acronym which means someone who is not me, someone who isn't me.
They have an experience through someone that isn't them.
They have an experience of being someone who isn't themselves.
That
So you
is
were
very
talking about the
strange.
ego.
Yeah,
Your ego is you
right,
in that sense. The goal is ego death,
right.
to kill yourself, as it were.
That's a Buddhist
Or
thing, right?
yes,
Right.
it's this is where
Because the
Buddhism
ego is
and
an
New Age
illusion.
intersect.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
So there's an intersection between New Age and Buddhism because of this. And I got in very heavy. It's a good thing that we went that direction because I was getting stuck on a loop there. Psychedelics end up tending you towards this sort of demi-Buddhist mindset where you're all about letting go and dissolving the ego as it is an illusion, and trying to achieve oneness with reality. The problem is that stops short of the truth. I will say this, as far as like if you want a religious point of view that doesn't approach heaven at all, does not approach actual discussions of truly divine things at all, if you want to have if God really didn't exist and this world went forward, Buddhism would probably be the correct religion. Luckily,
In-
God exists. So,
Interesting. Yeah,
but there are a lot of concepts in it that are accurate as far as creation only is concerned. I think I've told you this before. I find the concept of the yin yang to be extremely accurate as far as just reality in this life is concerned. But when you factor in the divine, you end up falling into entities that are all light with no dark, or all dark with no light.
yeah,
And so what it does is it takes advantage of truth that is in our reality, and it expands that into its own ideology without looking deeper into it in the spiritual direction it should go. So my Christianity is very spiritual because of that. So I ended up getting very heavily into New Age through Alan Watts and through these drugs and all of that. And what I ended up realizing one day, I had taken. So one of the things I would do is I mostly smoked weed every day, but when I wanted to have a trip and I didn't have access to heavier drugs, what you would do is you would take a break from marijuana for anywhere between 2 weeks to 2 months. And then at the end of that waiting period, the next day, you don't eat anything. You go to the weed store, you get yourself a 1 gram syringe of pure Rick Simpson oil. You squirt that onto a piece of toilet paper because it breaks apart and digests easily. And you pop that in your mouth and drink it like a pill.
Wow.
The whole gram. So if that's 65% THC, which Rick Simpson oil is anywhere from like 60% to 75% THC. If it is in that range, that's 650 milligrams of marijuana you're eating. Most edibles are 5 milligrams.
Okay.
So we're talking mega doses here.
Right.
One day, I was taking that, and it had kicked in full, and I was just sitting there. It was nighttime by that point, and I was listening to Alan Watts trying to meditate, and he started talking about his upbringing and how he grew up as a Christian in the Anglican Church in England. And I kept hearing him try to describe stuff, and when he would, I would be trying to close my eyes, trying to drift off and imagine what he's talking about. And because that's normally what I did, but this was a real life subject, not a spiritualism subject.
Right.
And he would say things about Christianity like, yeah, but Alan, I know that's not true. I know that's not accurate. I can't even remember what he was talking about anymore because I was so blazed out of my skull. Oh my gosh, dude, it was so bad.
Yeah.
But he left. I realized at a certain point that he left Christianity because he didn't understand Christianity. He didn't believe in these things. I'm like, yeah, but Alan, he wasn't supposed to be just a teacher. He was supposed to be the Son of God, and Son of God isn't some personal status that anyone can have when they hit a certain level of enlightenment. Jesus was uniquely the Son of God in a very unique sense.
Yeah. So you understood this even though you weren't really a Christian at all.
I understood that that's what it meant.
Yeah. You understood
I understood what was taught.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was his understanding that I knew was incorrect.
And you were realizing this as you're tripping?
Yeah.
Interesting. That probably wasn't a great trip.
It was a wonderful trip, actually.
Really?
Yeah, because I didn't have the conviction against sin at the time.
All right.
It was just, I ended up pausing him. I put on some music and I drifted off into nothing, just panicking for water every half hour or so for the next 8 hours. That's what you're doing. That's how weed is. That's how edible weed is when you mega dose it.
You get really thirsty, huh?
My gosh, you get so thirsty you think you're going to die. That thinking you're going to die is the trip kicking in. And what you're supposed to do from the perspective of somebody trying to trip is you are supposed to try your best to not give in to what you think your physical needs are. And if you can manage to do that, you will leave your body. And become someone who isn't me. And then you get to have a different experience than this life for a little while. So that's like the goal of it. But regardless of all that, I would recommend against it for most people. Most people. Some people probably need a kick in the ass like that in certain ways.
Do you think you did?
There are people who are already I think what I intended for self-pleasuring and evil, God intended for good. Whether I needed to go that route, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think anybody who's naturally going down that route, though, definitely they need it.
Yeah.
If I ever meet somebody who's on drugs, I encourage them to get into psychedelics instead of getting into meth or getting into heroin or something. If they're on that sort of stuff, I always encourage them to go towards the psychedelic route because you can keep up the psychedelic mindset by continuing to smoke weed. It's way less dangerous.
Right.
And it has that more genuine feeling of philosophical undertone to it, So, well, I guess you don't know. But
I only know what I've been told, but yeah, I never have really done drugs.
good.
Yeah,
They suck.
yeah.
They're wonderful, but they suck, man.
It's
They're
usually
not wonderful in a good way. They're
it's usually
the
things
fact.
that are really fun and great in one respect are not in another. They usually have really terrible effects. Like having sex with a woman. Um,
Yeah.
like it could be great,
Post
but
nut clarity.
yeah, exactly.
uh,
Like,
so anyway, I had this epiphany that Alan Watts was full of crap as far as spiritual stuff is concerned. Because if he couldn't even pay attention in going to a literal seminary for 18 years of his
wow,
life
wow, yeah,
and then devolving into Buddhism,
and not
then how
knowing
can
what
I
Jesus
trust?
said.
Yeah, not even being accurate in his description of what Christianity is.
Yep.
How can I trust anything he says as far as spirituality is concerned?
Yeah, you
And
became very
so,
disillusioned.
exactly. So I ended up getting into, I ended up becoming a bit more atheist in that moment, surprisingly. You'd think I would go back to my roots more in a certain way, but I wasn't ready yet.
Yeah.
But I did open myself back up to looking into Christians making arguments about things, and I got very, 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 very heavy into the spiritual philosophy of Christianity. I ended up looking into mysticism, Christian mysticism, which a lot of people don't like the idea that Christianity has mysticism, but Christianity has an extremely rich history of mysticism with the hesychasts and orthodoxy. Is a huge tradition of mysticism. So I ended up looking a lot into that, and I ended up getting into an argument with a friend about the reality of the soul, because I believed in the soul. I mentioned earlier I was never a dualist,
Right.
or I was always a dualist. I was
Yes.
never a monotypist of either side. So I ended up getting into an argument with him about it, and I started looking on YouTube, and I found an old YouTuber that I used to watch named Inspiring Philosophy, who I stopped watching when I started drifting, and I noticed that he had a series that was just coming out. I believe part 3 had just come out, called The Irreducible Mind.
Okay.
Now, that YouTube series that he made is based on a book of the same name, The Irreducible Mind. But this isn't just like arguments of like of the spirit is real. These are genuine, like, scholarly articles disproving naturalistic causality of consciousness, that the mind does not come from reality. The reality seems to tap into whatever the mind is. And this did two things. First, it really spoke to the internal spiritualism that had been instilled within me by the psychedelics. So first of
Uh-huh.
all, it did that, which is a huge step. And the second thing that it did is it started to push me more towards the Christian direction.
Yeah, because he's a Christian. IP.
Yeah, he's a Christian apologist. Love
Yeah.
IP.
Yeah, I
Great
like him
guy.
too.
So I started with getting back into the spiritual side of Christianity. I let myself drift by not thinking more thoroughly, and I realized that I had made a terrible mistake. That's what I realized. When I finally realized that I had gone towards a physical truth that was like literally true as far as like personal experience and spirituality are concerned, because that's the thing that the psychedelics and all that does. It doesn't show you something that's not real. It shows you something that's real and then deceives you about it. And that's what the devil does, right? he
Yeah.
he skews scripture, skews your perceptions, all of that.
Yeah.
But he doesn't just outright tell you, hey, 1 + 1 = 7. Ah,
Right. I
he's
mean,
not like that.
all the best lies are 99% true, 1% false.
Yeah, that's how you hide a lie. You have to hide it inside of the truth.
Yep.
And so I attached myself to the falsehoods, and I had a a rough moment one day when I was on a lot of weed. Again, I took a ton, and I started having a bad trip. And man, I started having a bad trip, and instead of going off into something else, actually, I'll back up a little bit. I was living with my current fiance at the time. We had made it off to Montana together, and we were using marijuana heavily in Montana. And we had a predatory landlord. So we left one of our homes to go try to start a business and live in the building where the business would be taking place. And we had a predatory landlord invite us in, try to kick us out as soon as possible, refuse to give us back our deposit, and then try to charge us rent for a full month for the 2 weeks we were supposed to stay there. I mean, we tried signing up for a full 1 year lease, but she denied. After we moved in, she denied our lease, refused to give us back the deposit until we left, and then charged rent out of that deposit when we left.
That sounds awful.
Oh man, it was awful. So she effectively made us homeless.
Right.
And I had moved back to Washington with my family, and it's harder to do weed when you're with family, but I was still trying as much as I could. And one day, I took a few weeks of a tea break, and I went to the weed store and I got a big 2-gram joint that was like 40% THC. So smoking the whole thing was like 800 milligrams.
All right.
And I smoke the whole thing, and I get home and I start panicking. But smoked is a slightly different drug than eaten marijuana. They're not identical. THC versus THCA. They have slightly different psychological effects. They have slightly different physiological effects. So I was panicking, but I was panicking because my mouth was dry, not because I thought I was failing to drink water. And I'll go into a little bit of detail here. One of the themes for me, whenever that would happen, is I feel like I'm being held there and I'm not allowed to go get water until I figure something out.
Wow. Okay.
And I think that was God acting on me. And I thought every time that my eyes were open and I was being punished with thirst, that was God acting on me. And every time I closed my eyes, I would see this. I don't even want to say see. You know how do you know what a morphine is? A morphine is in your eyes, or sorry, not morphine. Phosphine is in your eyes.
No, I don't.
Whenever you close your eyes at night and you see those warm, slowly moving blobs of color, like projected on your eyelids, even as a kid,
Okay.
or you press on your eyes with your fists.
Yep.
Those are called phosphines.
Okay.
When I was on that weed that night, the phosphines formed a green symmetrical pattern that occasionally looked like a face. And when my eyes were closed, my thoughts would change to things that are mocking me and laughing at me for doing what I've done, and saying how I'll never be free and I'll always be this person and nothing will ever change about me because I'm awful. And now that I'm older, I understand that is the despair that comes along with sin. The one thing that because there's two sides to sin. One is you can be convicted against sin but still not be saved because you're falling victim to the despair of sin, which is another sin in and of itself. So that was the despair of sin that was speaking to me. And I realized that that's what was happening because I had started to get into Christian stuff again. I got into like Mike Winger and Sam Shamoon and a few other people. And I realized that I needed God to stop despairing over this sin. And so I fell down on my knees in the middle of my room and I started praying, and tears flooding out of my eyes. I said the most beautiful prayer I ever said in my life. It was like a song, man.
Wow.
It even rhymed.
And
It was
this
like
wasn't while you were
poetry.
on drugs?
Oh, I was 100% on weed.
Okay.
I was on a lot of weed.
Was this when you had
But
smoked that huge thing?
yeah,
Okay.
because what I would do is I would go on about a mile walk and smoke the whole thing, and then when I got back to the house, I would just do whatever I would normally do. And but I fell to my knee. This is why I'm kind of ambivalent about it being demons or angels or God or whatever, because I think you can still be in the headspace where you're communicating with God you're not communicating with God. You are experiencing what God wants you to experience. I guess it's described as a non-specific amplifier, marijuana is, where whatever you're trying to experience, you're going to experience it harder. And I was trying to experience salvation from the despair from my own sin.
Wow. Okay.
And I ended up saying this prayer that I just made up off the top of my head, or maybe the Holy Spirit was speaking through me or something. But I only remember one line from the whole thing anymore. I need you now, Lord. Please come. I need you now, Lord. And every time I would trip after that on marijuana, I would say that line and the despair would go away until I drifted off into my own thoughts again, and I would have that sensation of a darkness within again, and then I would say it again. And eventually it got to the point where I realized it was something between knowing it was wrong to continue, but also knowing I had gotten everything out of marijuana that I could get out of it. It was something in between those two factors. It wasn't 100% one or 100% the other, because of course I know it's wrong, but there's still that pleasure seeking within. And for me, the pleasure was I was seeking a pleasurable spiritual delusion that would give me what I spiritually wanted. I was instrumentalizing my own spirit, you could say.
Okay.
And I was abusing myself in that manner, and I knew it was wrong, but I wanted it for the pleasure. I realized finally in that moment, and this is what I think was 100% a revelation directly from the big man himself. I realized that I have gotten everything I'm going to get out of this. You can stop now.
Yeah.
Like, you can stop now. You've gotten everything that you're going to get out of this.
Everything
Like,
worth it. Yeah.
it wasn't worth it. It definitely wasn't worth it anymore.
Right.
Not that it was ever specifically worth it in the first place, but man, it definitely wasn't worth it anymore because there's nothing more I would have been able to get out of it.
Yeah.
It was just, I got all of my data. I have received enough revelations from it. I understood that we're all one. And I still believe that in a certain sense, but I don't believe it in the sense that we're all one with God anymore like I used to.
Right.
Now I understand that we are all one with creation. Creation is all one. And when you love each other, that's supposed to be you sharing in God's love for creation, back into God, you trying to love God back because you're part of creation and God loves his creation.
Yeah.
And that ended up being when I realized that, and I realized that I was instrumentalizing everything and my mindset was in the wrong place. I broke down and I completely came back, man. I lifted my eyes the next morning after falling asleep from that giant joint, smoking that giant joint in 1 hour, and I opened my eyes and it's like I was seeing things with a different light again. Or real light for the first time in forever, I could say. It was something else, man. This is something else. Just the way that revelations happen to us. And so I ended up becoming a pretty big apologist against New Age,
Okay. Makes sense.
New Age esotericism, because I mean, my whole history with it had become, you know, I
It's what you understand, right?
yeah, it's what you understand that you end up becoming a good apologist against. Like you're good
Yeah.
against atheism.
Yep.
Sam Shamoon's good against Islam.
Yep.
Other Christians are good against other things. She's in the group chat with us, Tappy, the Lizard King, her.
Who's that?
She's in the group chat with us.
Yeah, but I mean, who is she?
She is the person who runs the Lizard Kingdom Discord. She's just a popular internet liberty Christian personality. That's
Okay.
all.
Is she on
As far as
Twitter?
I'm aware. She might do other stuff. If she does, I don't know. Yeah, she's in the group chat with us.
Okay.
But anyway, for her, it's Appalachian mysticism. Because there's like Appalachian country people magic. I don't know if
Really?
you've ever heard of it.
No, I haven't.
Oh, dude, it's kind of like brujeria or santeria,
Okay.
where
I know
there's
about Santeria.
okay, so you know that it's like old Latino magic
Yeah.
hidden in Catholicism.
Yep.
Brujeria is the same way, and Appalachian magic is the same thing, but just for Appalachian stuff. Old Native American magic, black magic.
Wow. Okay. And she knows a lot
But
about that.
hidden. Yeah, she knows a decent amount about that. I won't get into details because I don't want to push on her personal privacy. I'm sure she won't be mad if I just say the fact that she knows about it, and she has a decent amount of knowledge against it. It's also why she hates AI.
Really?
Yeah. If you ever wanted to talk to her, I forget what her handle is. It's at Lizard Kangs _ or something like that. She's always making new accounts, as far as I know. She's been banned a few times. So anyway, I ended up becoming a pretty big arguer against New Age, and the reason my primary argument is the advent of New Age pretends like it is the great combiner, if you will, where it thinks that all religion, the whole idea that all religions really say the same thing, that comes from New Age.
Okay.
Like that is 100% a New Age thing. So
Right. Yeah, the coexist thing, you mean?
yeah, like coexist and a whole bunch of other things. Whatever the contents are on a Dr. Bronner's bottle, if you've ever seen that, it's kind of New Agey.
No, I haven't.
But if you ever go to Walmart and you're in the body soap section, just look for the bottle it's completely covered top to bottom in text. It's great soap. It's Castile soap, so it's just great plant oil soap. But man, there's some real wacky stuff written on there. It's not bad. None of it disagrees with Christianity, and that's one of the problems. That's like a proto New Age belief. Actual New Age comes from, if I remember right, Deepak Chopra, but it's not necessarily all him. It's more like this attempt to syncretize all religions into one because they're all really saying the same thing.
Yeah, the elephant in the pit with the blind men.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. basically the problem is by trying to combine all these religions into one, you end up creating a problem because you end up being someone who doesn't respect any of these religions that you're trying to combine. By trying to respect all of them so much that you're trying to believe all of them at once, you end up not respecting any of them. All the things that New Age and Buddhism disagree on, all the things that Christianity and Buddhism disagree on, all the things that atheism and Christianity and Buddhism disagree on, they try to syncretize them all together.
Right.
Which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Literally not possible.
Yep.
And so I ended up becoming a pretty big apologist against that. Ended up sort of becoming my thing. And so yeah, that was my journey.
Wow, very different.
Yeah, very different direction. You through materialism, me through dualism.
Yeah. At least you had a good background in philosophy. I didn't.
I think that's why I didn't go through materialism. Here's the thing. I think I was more deceived than you. Not that it's a pissing contest, but I think I was more easily deceived than you because of the whole grounding in an understanding of spirituality. Because at least you were completely away from it. So when you came back, you could be like, "Oh, well, you just follow the most logical one," and that ended up being Christianity.
Yeah.
But for me, it was like I have to understand all these things from a deep spiritual perspective that may or may not be accurate or useful or helpful. And I have all these extra things to filter through that I don't. That someone in pure materialism doesn't have to get rid of a bunch of fake understandings of what the soul and the spirit do when the mind is asleep, for example.
Right.
Like as far as a materialist is concerned, that's just a bunch of synapses firing off while you're asleep. That's just the brain turning off. You're just not there anymore, man.
Exactly. Yep. That's how.
Whereas for me,
think about
I had to unlearn. Sorry, what?
That's how they think about it.
Yeah, exactly. And so for me, I had to unlearn some philosophies I had come to believe in, like the Bardo period. You want to know how Hindus and Buddhists, Eastern reincarnation believers, you know how they look at dementia?
No.
That's your soul getting ready to leave your current body for your next one. And there are other souls drifting in and out of your body. That's why you tend to seem like you're a different person when you're having fits of dementia. I believed that, and I had to unlearn that.
That actually is a pretty good explanation, though, I will say.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's all great explanations. That's why it's so good at deceiving us.
Yeah.
I think Christianity, at the end of the day, takes the best advantage of both materialism and the immaterial.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we study God's creation. That's why science exists, is because we study God's creation.
Because we're able to make sense of it because the world is intelligible.
Exactly. And God gave us minds which can intelligate things. I don't know what the operating term for that would be.
Intelligible.
Yeah. Intelligize. To make tangible.
Yeah.
I guess that works.
Coherent.
Yeah, we can make it tangible,
Rationalize.
Man. Rationalize, yeah. That's a good one. That works.
I think it does.
So at the end of the day, we both kind of came to similar ends. So what I find interesting is you came from the charismatic background.
Yeah.
Which is very different philosophically from that's a very highly philosophical form of Christianity, or at least it's supposed to be. Now, I'll start off saying this. I have big problems with charismatics. Big problems. I think that...
Well, I'm a Baptist now.
Based. It's pretty good. I don't know what I am. I call myself a communionist.
Well, are you in a good church?
I'm technically in an independent fundamental Baptist church,
That's what I am.
but I'm not beholden to it,
Yeah.
and maybe I'm just narcissistic and I think I know better than the pastor, but there's some big problems that my church has. So for example, they sing the national anthem in church
Okay. Yeah.
during any sort of American celebration. They
Yeah.
sing the national anthem in church,
Right.
which is really weird to me.
Yeah. My church does that sometimes too.
Ugh.
Occasionally, it's pretty rare, and I feel weird about it too. We did the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah, like what the heck is that?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't. I. It's nice to hear somebody else that kind of is like, you know, not. I mean, I like my
It seems like
country.
serving two masters.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Maybe it's a libertarian slash anarchist thing.
I
Just the
don't
whole
think
southern
so.
end of the compass. You don't think so?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it might be. I mean, I'm sure that people that aren't libertarian minded would. I'm sure that they probably wouldn't. They'd be a lot less likely to see a problem with that. So maybe it is, but to me, it
Yeah.
just is like, do we need to do this in church?
Yeah,
You know, like
exactly.
the
Exactly.
Pledge of
We're supposed to
Allegiance,
worship God, not America.
right? And I feel like that's something that a lot of Americans and especially Christians lose sight of is they have this love of country, and they put like the Constitution almost on the same pedestal as the Bible, and that sort
Yeah.
of thing. And it's like,
Isn't the Constitution literally in the Trump Bible?
I think it is, yes. I'm pretty darn sure that's exactly what he
That's
did.
gross.
I kind
That
of I was
disgusts
watching the
me.
video of him selling that Bible, and I stopped it, but I'm pretty sure that's what he did.
Ugh.
Yeah,
Um
I see that kind of stuff, and
yeah.
I'm like, I don't know if I can vote for this guy. Anyway, politics.
I stopped voting cuz I don't
Yeah,
think there's any sort of vote that is good anymore, but I don't want to get on the
yeah,
political track.
yeah,
Um Yeah, my church does a lot of things I'm really not a fan of. So I've been slowly growing more disillusioned with them. I don't even consider myself in the same denomination anymore. Like I said, I call my denomination communionist, which is a twofold thing. Number one, it sounds and is spelled kind of like communist, which makes traditional Republican conservatives really mad and makes me laugh.
uh huh,
Um, um, and then it's actually about the importance and the meaning behind communion. More than just communion, there's Eucharist, there's the communing of the people. So
mm-hmm.
I call it communionism. Not a cessationist, but I'm not a charismatic either. My problem with the charismatic movement, and this is why I brought that up, is I think they have what the gift of tongues is wrong.
Yeah, so do I.
Because like going like that's not tongues.
Right, that's not
That's
what
just
I
random
see.
crap.
Yeah,
If you read the Bible,
yep,
the only mention of quote unquote the tongues of angels is Paul talking about, even if I came to you with all knowledge, all possible knowledge, even if I came to you speaking every human tongue and even the tongues of angels, and I have no love in my heart, then I'm all of it is useless. That's what he's saying. He's literally putting out a thing saying, even if all these exaggerated perfected things were true about me, if I have no love in my heart, it's all useless. Like that's what he's saying. He's not saying that you will speak in the tongues of angels.
yeah,
And so from what I see, what the gift of tongues seems to be is it seems to be to go to an area where the language is not known to you and you have no one to translate for you. God will provide a translator for you in the form of somebody who is gifted with the gift of interpretation. So you have the ability to speak your native language. somebody with the gift of tongues can speak their native language, and somebody with the gift of interpretation can hear that person speaking their native language, and they hear it as their native language instead.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
That's what it seems to be to me.
Yeah, same.
And
That's what
I've
it
done a
was.
lot of looking into it.
Yep.
We're like, aren't these guys Galileans? How are they speaking Samaritan?
Right. That's what is described. You haven't seen the meme video that I made about this, have you?
I don't think so.
Oh man, it's great. I'll send it to you after this. You'll love it.
Sounds good.
Yeah, yeah. I'd love for you to watch it. Almost nobody saw it for whatever reason, but it's hilarious. It'll be right up your alley. Anyway, yeah.
Let's see here.
I'm not a big fan of the charismatics either, but my mom is still doing that, so she's really happy that I'm saved though, and we talk about Jesus, and it's really nice, and of myself, my brother and sister, I'm the only one that's saved, so hopefully my brother and sister get saved soon. But
that would be amazing, man. That would be
yeah.
amazing. So what's the end result of all this? What's the end core here? We have two testimonies of people starting off Christian, drifting away, and then coming back, discussing the nature of their sin from their experience, and then coming to the same sort of end result in conviction. I think that's a pretty decent summation of what's happened here. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. And it's oftentimes the story of the prodigal son, in one form or another.
There's more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who require no repentance.
Yep, and the funny thing about that is there are no righteous persons, just self-righteous.
Yeah, exactly. I'll finish my side on this note. I had a friend come to me a few days ago. She was. Do you know who that Nala fitness girl is? That girl who was an OnlyFans top earner and repented, and she's now a Christian.
I know Nala. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a friend who's in a similar situation to her. This friend has fibromyalgia, and she's very mentally ill, and she has really mutually abusive fights with her partner, her boyfriend, or whatever. And I've been doing the evangelical free style of evangelism with her, because she was I'm not going to try to preach to somebody who calls themselves a Satanist. Like, I might mention it from time to time, but I'm not going to sit here and try to actively argue the position,
Right.
Because if you call yourself a Satanist and you have all these preconceived beliefs, it's going to go in one ear and out the other, because you're never going to think that you being a sinner is bad.
Right.
That's the problem with being a Satanist.
Yep.
So she had a really awful fight with her boyfriend or partner or whatever, and she messages me on Discord the other night, and she says, "I'm broken. I want to die. Everything is terrible. I can't believe things have gone this direction. I need to change. I need some sort of help."
Wow.
Do you have anything that you can help me with? And I mean, part of it was I just talked to her and listened to her. But another part of it was I got her to realize that she really was at her limit, like she was saying. Like, her being at her limit is her realizing what her position really is. And I was trying to tell her that. And I had the opportunity. I asked her, has anybody actually told you the whole gospel message? Like, we all hear bits and pieces of the gospel message when we're away from it. But, like, has anyone ever actually told you the whole thing? And she said no.
Wow. Okay.
Please let me know. I've actually never heard it in one shot like that. And so I spent 2 hours because she wanted to hear it in voice messages. I spent 2 hours just trying to say the right phrases over and over. I pop it into Audacity and listen to my own words before I send it.
Yeah.
And over the course of 2-3 hours, I ended up sending her 20 minutes worth of dialogue, just trying to make sure I got all my points right. She's a very delicate person, and I hope that she's going the right direction. She hasn't told me, she hasn't even replied since I sent all of them.
Right.
So I hope she's thinking on it. She's sitting on that knowledge and that idea, and I hope that she moves somewhere with it. And I think that's a little bit of what we all need,
Yeah.
We all need to have the chance to sit and listen and hear someone's testimony and hear the gospel message. And that if you're feeling that urge that you might be even if it's not like the urge that you're broken or something, if you even have this notion that you might be a sinner, just talk to the Christian that you know the best. Just go talk to them. Ask them, hey, what's the gospel message? Because the thing about it is, you don't want to go to some random person because they don't know you. They're
Right.
not going to be able to tailor it for you.
And you're probably not going to care what they have to say, too.
Exactly. But if you go to a friend, somebody who deeply cares about you, who exemplifies what you think a Christian should be and has been with how loving and respectful they are to you, they're the person you want to talk to. So if you're listening to this and you've somehow gotten through all of the stuff we said here, and you think that there might even be a part of an inkling that you might be a sinner, just know that being a sinner isn't a cudgel. Nobody's trying to beat you up over being a sinner. That's not the point of it. And if anyone is, they're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be the proof that you need a savior. So go talk to that person.
Yep, absolutely. 100% agree.
Daniel, is there anything else you want to say before we go? What I'll let you do your own outro here. Are there any projects or anything you're working on, or any directions that you're moving into?
Well, I'm about to put out an argument here in the next couple days, within a week for sure, which is pretty interesting. The argument is going to be, I'll tell you the syllogism. If atheism is true, then nothing is designed. Things are designed, like cars and space shuttles and computers and smartphones, and therefore atheism is not true. I think it's going to be a really interesting argument. I've actually run it past a couple of people that are very intelligent, very philosophically minded, and they're like, "Did you come up with this?" And I'm like, "Yeah," because they're like, "I haven't heard this before," and I'm like, "No, this one's all me." So
that's funny. Does it pass the reversal test that I gave you earlier?
I'm pretty sure it does. I mean, it's a standard modus tollens.
It's pretty good. I can't see why. So wait, what are the axioms again?
So it's, if atheism is true, then nothing is designed. Things are designed, therefore atheism is not true. And basically, what I could just give a brief justification. Whenever you talk to atheists about design, you bring up things like the complexity of life, and they say, well, life isn't designed, it just appears designed, but life comes about through natural processes.
Yeah.
So therefore, life is not designed. So if atheism is true, everything comes about through natural processes, including human beings. So if human beings are the result of just natural processes, then everything we do is also the result of natural processes. So whenever we design things, those things like the cars and the space shuttles would not actually be designed. They would be the result of natural processes as well. So therefore, the atheist would have to say that nothing is designed, including things that are clearly designed, like computers and space shuttles and the Large Hadron Collider and all of it. So it's like, do you want to?
That's hilarious.
Yeah, but that's the result of their logic.
Yeah, because Maybe you need an interim axiom being like human activity is caused by natural
Yeah,
processes.
it'll be in the justification of premise one.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. I love it. Well, I look forward to seeing that argument come out. Why don't you tell everyone where they can reach you?
Well, I am on Twitter mostly at Darwin to Jesus, and I'm also on YouTube. I've got a small YouTube channel with about 315 subscribers right now. I put out a video once every about 2 weeks or so, and it's a lot of work making those videos. So
Oh yeah.
if you enjoy watching YouTube videos, I hope you go over and check it out because I would like for that to grow and everything. And I do think that I make good content over on YouTube. So yeah, I hope you go check that out. But
You know, it's funny. I found you on YouTube
did you
organically.
really?
Yeah,
That's
I was just flipping through shorts and one of your videos popped up. And I'm like, wait a second. That's Darwin to Jesus.
that's cool, right? Did you like
That's
it?
how the algorithm. Yeah, it was one of your shorts.
Yeah, yeah,
I can't remember which one, but yeah, it was pretty good, man.
that's awesome. Yeah, yeah.
Well, um, everyone who's listening, thank you for listening to the I Hate the Antichrist podcast. Again, IHTA cast is brought to you by W Energy. Great product, great taste. Coffee fruit extract has neurotropics in it, good vitamins and minerals. Use the code IHTA for 10% off at w.gg. And then the podcast is also brought to you by webarchist.com. If you're in the Liberty space or the Christian space and you need a website built, please check out BJ. She's awesome. She will have it done for you shockingly fast. And thank you all for listening. This has been one of my favorite podcasts. It has gone on way longer than the podcast normally goes, which to me puts us a little bit closer to Joe Rogan tier. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and have a wonderful rest of your evening. Daniel, thank you for coming on.
Thanks a lot for having me, brother.
All right, peace, everybody.